extra precautions. You are at a higher risk for getting seriously ill if you are over 65 or if you have any serious underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease like asthma, diabetes, or if you're undergoing cancer treatment. If you're at a higher risk for getting seriously ill, it's essential you take extra care to protect yourself. Stay home, avoid close contact with others, wash your hands frequently with soap and water for 20 seconds, disinfect frequently touched objects like doorknobs and light switches. The choices you make are critical, and their impact is significant.
This is Big Poppy, host of Jazz from the Cabinets. Join me each week for a listening tour of the first century of jazz, an eclectic mix of Dixieland, big band, cool jazz, bebop, contemporary jazz, world jazz, all jazz in all forms. That's Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy on Rainier Avenue Radio, streaming worldwide on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
Welcome to the coronavirus pandemic.
I'll take coronavirus for 100. Fever, chills, shortness of breath, loss of taste or smell. What is stay at home and isolate?
Correct.
Coronavirus for 200. Inability to stay awake, persistent pain or pressure in chest, trouble breathing. What is seek immediate help?
Coronavirus for 500.
Crippling and potentially dead infectious disease eliminated the United States with vaccination.
What is the polio vaccine? I'll take coronavirus for 700.
The Daily Double! Should I take the coronavirus vaccine?
Wait. Hold up. This is not a game. It's time for serious discussions. We have coronavirus vaccines, but not everyone is comfortable taking them. Here's the facts. Based on what has been proven about vaccines for other diseases, COVID-19 vaccine may help keep you from getting seriously ill, even if you do get the virus. Getting vaccinated also may protect people around, particularly those at greater risk for severe illness from COVID-19. We don't yet have all of the answers. Get informed, talk to your healthcare physician, and make the right decision for you. This is a message supported by the Washington State Department of Health.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not being reprimanded by traffic cops, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Hello, this is Rainier Avenue Radio coming to you live from Seattle's Columbia City Theater. I'm Sam Harris, housing economist and co-founder of SeeKing Change, a collective examining the homeless situation in the greater Seattle and King County regions. Each week, we will explore an issue at the heart of the problem to find the root causes of homelessness. At the end of this 12 weeks, we'll present a unified regional solution. Today, we're proud to have our guest, interim co-chair of the King County Continuum of Care Board, and co-chair of the System Performance Committee under the KCRHA, King County Regional Homeless Authority, Ruby Tuesday Romero. She actually helped begin SeeKing Change in September of last year to connect with the community. Today, she's here representing herself as an individual, and we are going to hear her perspective on the policies and best practices, digging into the homeless situation, and who's responsible for fixing this housing crisis. Thanks for joining us today, Ruby. So today, maybe I'll just start with a light question. Are we getting closer to the solution?
Oh, that light question. Yeah. So if you look at it in different ways, which I think is kind of the major contention in this situation, is that there's so many ways to look at it. But one thing I think that you're maybe talking towards is the point in time count, and that was just released with a higher number than was done previously. And so I think when we take a look at that and we take into consideration that the point in time count has always been an undercount, we've always quote unquote known it's been an undercount. And so trying to find those different ways to get a better count is what they were trying to do with this new methodology, right? So if we look towards back in a previous presidency, they were speaking towards taking vaccine or, not giving vaccines or not doing the count of tests, right, for a specific illness. And then the number wouldn't increase. Well, that's kind of the same concept here, is if you just don't count them, then the number doesn't increase. But if you actually are proactively trying to find a better method of counting some underserved and not easily found community, it's going to be increasing as you get better and better, right? So if we, and quickly, if we look at like the previous counts of the consolidated data from 2022, I think is what it was, when they took a bunch of different data from the behavioral health and recovery department and the public health sector or something like that.
Counted up all of the silos.
Right. They counted up all the silos, and then they said, we got some intersectionalities here, and we think we're still missing about 8,000 people unsheltered living without being in stable housing or in a habitable area. And that was about 8,000. So if you just take whatever number they had then, which I think was about 11,000, and you add 8, that's still about almost 20, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're still at an undercount, but we're getting better. But so that's kind of the one side of where we might see it looks like it's not getting better. And that's the quantitative side, right? But if we look at the qualitative side of what kind of system is changing, how we're approaching the system as a whole, and starting to kind of come together as like communities and saying, okay, like, let's roll up our sleeves, let's get this done. And that's kind of a beneficial part. I feel like as we collaborate and as we really start to understand each other's sectors, then we'll see some actual successes in the qualitative part, the quality of services. And so it is changing, and we all do want, the same thing essentially. And that's like what we hear often. One side wants us wants people off the streets. The other side wants people off the streets. So let's figure out how to keep people off the streets. And that's the important part, is preventing them from becoming homeless in the first place a lot of the time.
Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah. So yes and no.
Yeah, right. Complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now you're on these 2 boards.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of buzz about this 3-board structure at the
Mm-hmm.
KCRHA, and we don't often hear about the COC board. Can you explain the role of the COC board?
Sure, I could do that. And just for clarification, I am on the board and I serve on a committee. So the committee is underneath the board. And so with the Continuum of Care, we are technically a federal board, meaning we are required to be there if we're going to receive funding from the Housing and Urban Development, right? Department of Housing and Urban Development.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. And if we want to receive the funding for permanent housing and, a lot, it's about, I don't know how many, I should know how many million, but I don't know how many million it is from the COC grant, but we are in charge of those funds. And so we make sure that all the programs are getting the funding from that COC program. And so if they want to be able to do that and get that money, they need to have the board of the COC board. And as somebody with lived experience and understanding of policy that and the system at hand with the homeless management information system and really digging into that policy, I was able to kind of sit on these at these tables. And yeah, so what we do is we're federally required, which means the other 2 boards are not federally required.
Okay, so this one will outlast KCRHA if there was any issue.
Yeah, if for some reason
change things up, that's not something they could change.
Yeah, well, it would just be under another. So before it was under All Home, which was the previous KCRHA essentially, right? I think, to my understanding, I wasn't a part of it. I don't know, but what I can say is that if there was to be a different approach, that would need we would still operate as a board. So the work that we're doing there is kind of long lasting, I guess, or longer lasting, hopefully. And the importance that I should touch on is if there were to be a new reiteration of whatever kind of regional approach, that would mean that they would have to do the paperwork all over again. And it's taken so long to get to this point where we're actually starting to cohesively, function. I observe them cohesively functioning with if they had better staffing, right? That's just my personal opinion, but I love the staff that I work with regularly. So anyway, long story short, we're the advisory committee to the implementation board and the governing committee. And those 2, first of all, the governing committee never existed in the ILA. That's why it's the governing committee. They're technically not a board. That's just where we see the mayors and the leader, the elected officials, the council members. That's where we see them participate in the homelessness system. And they wanted to have some say. So that's where they were able to barge their way in the door.
Right.
And they have their own board now, even though it's a committee.
That's right. It doesn't have the same power.
I'm just saying
maybe,
as all.
or-
No,
yeah.
I'm just kidding. But do they listen to the advice that we give? That's a whole nother public comment station,
Right.
right. And so, but what we do is the board, we can, work on these committees and reevaluate how we're rating and ranking programs for funding. So like that's kind of how we are doing the evaluation without doing the like evaluation portion. So every year they apply for these funds as an organization, and we are allowed to have these like stipulations or the requirements on an application, and that they get different points, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So you're at the COC level.
Mhm.
You're just advising on policy for the board.
We're supposed to
Right.
we don't actually advise them, so I should say that loosely.
Okay,
Mhm.
and then the policy is derived from the funder. So HUD in many cases, or and where else do you get money?
Right. Okay, great question. Thank you. So what I would say is that yes, and column A, column B. So what we do is we suffice the HUD measurements, right? So there's specific things that we have to do in order to get that funding, like to be transparent, right? Everybody understands that if there's a private organization and they ask for you to have only red flowers on their property, like you're allowed to have the red flowers on the property, right? Like that's the only color though. Paint the roses red, right? But if you're in a public sector, like you get all these other funding sources. We're supposed to be that funding distributor to everybody. So we get it from the cities, the county, right? Or from Seattle, the county. And then you get your federal funds. And then there's other other grants. And I could really break it down. We could get really quantum
Yeah,
with
no,
it.
That's okay.
But I think we'll
But so
take
we
a step back.
The city puts in, the county puts in,
Mhm.
the state, or is that
Yeah,
separate?
the state does
Okay.
too. And so there's the Department of Commerce that has the right-of-way funds. And there's also going to be specific funds that go to the state rather than just a county. And maybe they get the same kind of funds, but it's all very conglomerate in there.
Okay, so they kind of just amass all the money into one place.
Mhm.
That seems like a good idea, right? I mean, it helps you track where the money's going.
It could.
It could.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it makes it also a little bit more fractured in a way, because there's specific things that organizations are able to bypass just by having different types of funders in specific spaces. So like you could have an entirely privately funded organization that won't be subjected, and I say subjected loosely, but I mean, there should be protocols in place. There should be things that people need to hit. And that's what we were kind of talking about, was the HUD measurements. And so there's specific things that we need to hit to get the funding. And if we don't, then we risk losing the base funding for all of our programs, right? Like you can risk losing that. And we don't want to do that.
Right.
But what we can do is also have community metrics, which is a little bit more centered around what we want to see measured and like how we're addressing our organizations and what we're expecting of them. So like, specific things. And I can't speak to exactly what, just because we haven't like actually passed it. And but
that makes sense.
I'm working on it. I promise you
Yeah,
that.
excellent. Okay, so what I guess it was about a year ago, KCRHA came out with their 5-year plan,
Mhm.
and it estimated that it required about $12 billion over 5 years to support the people currently without housing.
Mhm.
And it sounds like permanent supportive housing wait lists are pretty long. And our budget, I was looking, is like 250 million.
Mhm.
And there's a discrepancy there in my head where 12 billion is such a
$12
giant
billion
number compared to our budget.
Mhm.
And there's this red light going on, right?
Mhm.
Well, that doesn't seem like a gap you can bridge.
Right. And that's an important gap that we have identified. What I will say is this is over an extended amount of time, the investment will pay for itself just based off of the fact that we'd be investing in the correct solutions. Because hands down, like I will say, the former CEO was not wrong about that number. And, so that's just the reality and the weight of the situation that we're in, and whether we want to mask it any which way or pay for portions of things that we think are going to be immediate solutions. I understand that, like, as you know, Americans, like in the United States of America, we tend to have the, you know, instant gratification mentality, and then, you know, with the dang TikTok and all that. No, I'm just kidding, but you get what I'm saying. Like we tend to be wanting to see things immediately delivered, you know, under 20 minutes and, you know, paid with by credit card. And that's just not what this is, you know? And so what I will say is the reason that housing wait lists are so long is because they are permanent. And so when we say permanent, we actually mean what, 6 years, 9 years. Technically, the voucher lasts for that long. And then they're supposed to be moving on to, like, you know, stable housing. But some of them are able to extend their vouchers and they stay for another 6 years. But permanent means
permanent, right?
and what does permanent mean to you, right?
A wait list for something permanent.
But they're not increasing the housing units that are permanent.
Right.
And so the number that stays the same doesn't ever filter down. It just clogs up, right? And so it's kind of like if you have all of your pegs in those slots, then it's going to prevent the rest of the pegs from getting into the slots. And that's okay, but we have to observe that it's not just about affordable housing, it's about deeply affordable housing. It's about providing mixed housing and providing spaces where people that can't afford the rent, which is a lot of people, we barely scrape by. You know, I'm sure there's people in this room that are behind on their rent.
Yeah.
You know, and so so like the answer really comes down to the housing first. And what is housing first, even? You know, the HUD definition is different from what the actual program is. And so a lot of the problem is that we're not actually employing the best practices that we should be employing to see the successes. And so it's kind of one of those situations where it's like, if only we would do the correct thing that's going to cost a lot of money and be quite a time investment and not necessarily be providing the instantaneous gratification that we want to see, but will be the solution. It's hard to communicate that to the people that only have 4 years or 2 years in office that want to hold on to those positions of power, which prevent them from being in the same situation that our people experiencing homelessness are experiencing on the street because they keep their job.
You got to have the instant gratification for the populace so you get reelected. And that kind of comes back around to sweeps, where you get that sense that they're doing something, but unless you're actually getting them into housing,
what are you doing? Yeah.
Right.
And I'm glad you mentioned sweeps. You know, quickly to speak to that, you know, that's where I think the most feasible way of battling the displacement and forced displacement and stealing of people's possessions and necessities and things that are really happening out there. People are really suffering from this instance. And think about when we talk about military children hopping around from school to school and town to town, and how, you know, not having stability is damaging to a psyche. And to think that that's not damaging to the adult psyche is kind of, I mean, neither here nor there. I'm not a psychologist, but you get what I'm saying.
It's harder to get your roots down.
If you don't have stability, how can you survive? You know, you're operating at a fight or flight, you know, or whatever kind of primal instinct that you have. And that's just because you're running on less sleep, you're running on less food, you're running on less everything. And that scarcity mindset is a real deal thing. You know, the scarcity mindset on top of having the trauma of losing house. Anyway, I think we're getting off topic. But what I do want to say is that housing first methodology is a behavioral health intervention, and we're not treating it like such. We're actually not doing housing first from the pathways to housing first, you know, practice, which is the only gold stamped best practice for this methodology. And so HUD has a different definition, and they say it's their own definition. That's okay. But they do say it's evidence-based, and I'm curious where their evidence is if they're not practicing this technical, you know, which started in the 90s in LA with, you know, potentially there was a woman that started it in the 90s, and it was then turned into a white paper and a study by a doctor that was a male. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things that got me into this in the first place was my friend at the GAO, and he gave me this report.
GAO?
Government Accountability Office.
Thank you.
Yeah. And he gave me one of their studies on that they're an investigatory arm of Congress.
Mhm.
They looked at HUD, and they came out and said HUD's data does not reflect reality. And so if you're making judgments on data that's not reflective of reality, how do we have a measure of success in this industry?
Right. And that's what the System Performance Committee really is digging into right now. And I encourage anybody listening that wants to like learn about the data side of this, like dig in now with me, because, you know, we meet the third Wednesday of every month. You can find the link on the KCRHA website. And I say this to say because we're currently actively working on the community metrics, incorporating something called a well-being approach, which is more person-centered and like actually asks what success is for the individual, which is something we've heard mirrored throughout the community of desire, you know, like desired by the community to have that more person-centered approach. And, you know, like I said, but as somebody with lived experience, like what I hear resonating in these metrics, I'm really trying to get to like the center of where I think the issue might be. Like, you know, some would argue that employee retention doesn't necessarily speak a lot about an organization, but I think it does. And so there's different metrics that I'm sure the community members out there really do want to know the numbers of, and think that is going to help solve, you know, the questions that we have. And I'm curious to know what those questions are, because we're developing these right now. And it's just about asking what programs do work and how can we look at those programs and start to ask where we can, you know, start to think about, I don't want to say, you know, start to think about employing like into an area, you know, and start to actually measure those things. So
That makes sense. So last week, the interim CEO for KCRHA withdrew his application to become the permanent CEO. Did he offer any reasons or advice that might help us understand why? And before you get to that answer, I'm going to just give a little shout out to on May 29th, live town hall on Chinatown and International District Light Rail. And that'll be live here on Rainier Avenue Radio at 6 p.m.
Ooh.
All right.
Now that sounds like fun. Is that district? That's not District 1. So no, I'm just I live in District 1, but I would love to. I'm going to attend that virtually, probably listen to it. Anyway, sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So back to the CEO question.
That's right.
Well, you know, I would encourage everybody listening to get engaged with Civic. First of all, what I want to say is like now that we have gone through the pandemic and we have hybrid meetings and we have the ability to attend hybrid meetings, like do the hybrid meeting if you want to know what's going on in your neighborhood. If you want to put an input, it might feel like you're putting it into an echo chamber with public comment, but get involved and it won't feel that way when you're sitting at the table with these people. I know I sound like that guy saying that kind of stuff, but get involved, you know, and because these are real questions that you're asking me. And if other people are interested in hearing these questions answered, like I'd love to talk to, you know, I'd like to talk with these people. Our community is the solution for every single area, because as I noted, the CEO mentioned something about the regional approach, right? He said he believed in the regional approach and that he felt that there was too much, you know, what I read in the letter that was submitted at least was that there was too much of a friction between the politics and the actual outcomes that people are desiring within the community and within the KCRHA structure and within the board structure, right? There are specific situations where, you know, I think, I don't know if I can, you know, theoretically, there was a meeting, you know, where, you know, an individual that would be considered, you know, a possibility for a candidate of the CEO search mentioned today that they, you know, had a specific feeling about a forced displacement of people experiencing homelessness, meaning a sweep, right? Okay. And that specific feeling doesn't like always resonate with a lot of the people that are sitting on the board with lived experience. And I heard multiple people in that space say that they turned off listening at that moment. And so I'm saying that very transparently, because this person also said that they believe in transparency. So as, you know, as somebody who can come into this space and say that we need to have that education, we need to have that allowance to be able to be heard and understood that lived experience isn't just sitting at the table for the heck of it. Like lived experience is part of, you know, these studies, these research, these things that you're pointing to when you say you know what you're doing. And when you go against those things that every consultant they've ever hired has said the same thing. That's all I need to say.
Yeah.
So I can understand why he withdrew his nomination if he feels like if he sees what I see, which is every single consultant says the same thing, and they continuously redraft a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a consolidated city plan, whatever you want to call it next week. Like, they're still redrafting the same thing. It's still, since the fire in Seattle has said we need more affordable housing, and they never did it.
Right. Well, it's $12 billion. It's, right.
I'm sorry, Bezos, how much?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the other priorities that our government has, and you see the people protesting some of them, you wonder if it's necessarily, are in our best interest to maybe redirect funds for this.
Yeah.
And where would that likely come from? I mean, is this something that
philanthropy
HUD needs to procure, or is it?
Oh, this community building.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's one of those where who do we ask for
money?
Right. Is this Biden? We just say,
Well,
look, Biden, we need $12 billion real quick.
He might have it.
He might have
It's
to
chump
fulfill
change or
some
Trump change or something. No, I'm just kidding.
bonding or something. Right.
Well, that's kind of where it comes to. I thought that the money from the weed sales were supposed to go to this kind of stuff.
Right.
I'm just kidding, but it's different. It's different initiatives. It's getting people supported in the, it's organizing inside and outside. It's getting the policy to align with what we really want to see as like lived experience, right? People experiencing homelessness, people within the ground, on the ground. And I think that, back to the CEO thing, like he felt the burnout that we all feel working in this uphill battle. And until we really are able to convey, and I say that word, convey the experience that there is, with work, I talk with my hands, and I hit the mic. But anyway, so it's when you convey the experience that we have, even as taxpayers, housed people, whatever it is, like we all experience the struggle of seeing somebody struggle.
Yeah.
I have to stop on the street to make sure people are breathing. And sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. A frustrating climb indeed. Well, that is all the time we have today for SeeKing Change.
But a worthy climb.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruby,
Sorry.
for being here. It is a worthy climb.
Mhm.
You're right. And that's why we're here. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for Seattle Here and Now.
Thank you.
Yeah.